First item is to call roll. I guess I'll call it.
Yes.
Jennifer Matthews.
I'm here, thank you.
Alex Sharp, I'm here. David Connick is here.
Engaged.
Almost. And Chris Bird.
Here.
Bill Anderson, actually, and we'll talk about this later, but he tendered his resignation to me via email. But we'll talk about that later. He's our fifth member.
And so he's absent.
So he's not here. Okay, the first item is review and adopting the agenda. Is there any changes or additions or deletions from anybody?
I move that we adopt it.
Is there a second?
I'll second it
All
as
in-
circulated.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And the next item is, you're still working on it? Is
Oh, I did want to say something. The minutes, let's move the minutes to
Yeah.
Late
Well,
now.
we can,
I meant to say that, to move the minutes to later in the meeting, okay?
does that work?
Friendly amendment to that motion.
So as amended.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're going to move the review of the minutes to the end. Okay, so the first item on our agenda, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 special use permits tonight. That's a big night for us.
6.
Well, actually 5. But anyway,
Okay.
the Anderson family apartment, is someone here for the Andersons? Do we have a chair they can come forward?
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you can go. You're welcome to come forward, whoever wants to present this.
Okay.
And you are
My name's Jason Anderson.
Jason Anderson, and you're the applicant?
I am.
Okay.
You want to come up?
Let me see what I've got here. Okay, and so you're interested in putting a family apartment, but you're actually going to construct the house? And these are the dimensions.
How could you have that?
You can look at it if you want.
I mean, I saw it on the internet.
It's
Okay.
3 bedrooms, right?
And you have 10 acres?
Yes.
Okay. And you're aware of the limitations, within 200 feet, and family member? Who's going to live there?
My mother and father-in-law.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, if there's any questions you have, you have to answer.
I didn't print it all. Has Medj been out there?
Yes, we've already got a septic permit.
So you did get the septic permit. Was that in the application or that was
There's a
pending?
letter, an email here, but it's from back
Yeah.
in November, so that they didn't have it then, but you got it since.
Yeah.
Can we see it? Sure.
We also have, it's been reviewed by DOC, and,
Is it a new entrance?
no.
No.
She's going to need to have a copy of this.
Okay.
Jeez.
Do you have any questions? No?
Not really. What are your plans for after your parents, your in-laws, it's your in-laws? Right?
It is, definitely so.
What's the plan after that?
So we hadn't really thought that far. I hope it's a long time before we have to even worry about that.
Chris, do you have any questions?
No questions.
I really don't have any at the moment. Was there a planning commission recommendation?
The planning commission was well disposed towards all of these
Okay,
special use
so this
permits.
one.
You go, who's the secretary of the planning commission?
Oh, you are?
You are?
I'm the clerk, yeah.
You are?
Mhm.
Oh. Well, next time they have a meeting, it might be nice if they would send us something about what they've done. I mean, there used to be some form that floated around that said what any conditions.
Oh, have the voting.
Or what the
I
voting was.
put that as my report.
Oh,
Oh,
I
it
saw it
is.
was in your
Oh.
report, but I mean, there used to be some form where the chairman or somebody signed off on it.
Well, I'm not sure if I saw the vote on this, or was
It was
it?
unanimous.
There was no conditions
No.
attached?
No.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna open the public hearing. Is it anybody who'd like to speak relating to this application? Okay, there being nobody, I'm gonna close the public hearing.
That was quick.
It's 5 seconds.
Is that right? Okay, do we have any further questions, or do we have a motion?
I move that we approve this application.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Is there any further discussion?
Yeah, I have a comment, and that is that I've got a problem with these family apartments when they're on a lot of this size that's already less than 25 acres, because the zoning ordinance says that density requirement is the maximum of 1 dwelling unit per 25 acres. So this would make 2 dwelling units in 10 acres. Therefore, whatever that finding is that we have to make under the ordinance, which I think is 170-157, about that one of the findings that has to be made is that it conforms with all the other, 170-52, is that it conforms with all the other requirements of the ordinance. I don't think I can make that finding. And I mean, I think, no offense to you, it's just, I mean, I have a problem, and I wish the Board of Supervisors, and I would like to see the Planning Commission do something about it, and that is this whole business of a 2-year time limit is kind of, they might as well just take it out, because it's meaningless, because for one thing, it's very difficult to enforce, if that's even possible, for the zoning administrator to go out and see if it's really a family member that's living there or not. That's number one. And number two, if they pass away or the 2 years expires, then it's just another rental unit. And that's a way, it's kind of a real easy way to totally circumvent the provisions of the ordinance that are supposed to restrict growth and development in the county and keep to the 1 dwelling unit per 25 acre rule. So I've already said that, I think, before in a couple of these cases, and this one's under 25 acres, so that's my problem with it. And there's nothing, again, I mean, the application in other respects is fine. I don't have any problem with that, but I can't make the finding that it complies with the other provisions of the ordinance, namely the density. So that's my comment.
And I think, as I may have stated before, it's in the ordinance and there is a provision for it, and the ordinance does allow 1 dwelling unit per parcel regardless of size, and so therefore to have an accessory dwelling to that dwelling
Within 200 feet.
within 200 feet, or there is an efficiency apartment. I mean, I think if the ordinance needs to be changed, that's probably the place to do it rather than at the enforcement. And I think you probably agree with that to some extent, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it anything else?
I completely agree with your perception of the situation, that I think we are getting on a very difficult and dangerous place where people with large parcels of land would be allowed to do things that people with small parcels wouldn't be allowed to do. That would seem to me restrictive and discriminatory.
Is there anything else?
No, I think that 10 years ago, they moved it that it had to be within 200 feet of the house, because that way it would, it would probably be family, and if it would be a rental unit, it would be less desirable. So that was one way of managing it ever so slightly.
Oh, okay, but they didn't say that. They could have fixed it
didn't
and
say
said,
that.
when they changed the ordinance to make it 200 feet, and I don't know. I was just in Culpeper last night, so 200 feet is, there's some places in Culpeper, there's 3 houses within 200 feet.
Right.
So,
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All
No.
opposed?
no, for the reasons I stated.
Okay. So Michelle will fix you up with the permit.
Okay.
And so we can have a copy of,
I'll get her, email her a copy of that.
It's for yours.
You all set?
Yes, that's
are you gonna be building it yourself?
No.
Oh, is it a,
right. Oh, we forgot.
is it prefabricated or sectional?
Yes.
Okay, the next item is Jackie, Joe and Jackie Muse, Jacqueline Muse, applying for a tourist home. And it sounds like this is right in Little Washington,
Yes, on
but
pretty much.
right outside, I mean, not in Little Washington, but next to Little Washington. Okay. And you are
BJ, Nabla,
Knobloch?
yes.
Spell that.
Knobloch.
BJ.
No black.
And you're affiliated somehow?
I'm the spa manager for Jack.
Spa manager, okay.
And she's in Toronto this week, so let me
Okay.
go.
And so what you're looking to do is to build, operate this dwelling as a tourist home?
Yes, there's another one.
Airbnb. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about this?
Mr. Chairman, there are conditions attached within your packet, recommendations from
Oh,
the
okay.
planning commission, and I'm pulling those up on the screen right now.
Oh, okay.
And at the planning commission meeting, the applicants were fine with these conditions.
Oh, right
6
here,
people,
okay.
2 cars, and
Working.
safety feature.
That doesn't sound too onerous, does it?
What is that?
These conditions? You don't have any problem with that? Okay.
That's a-
Yeah, they're on the.
Oh, here,
Oh, my glasses.
okay.
She's just-
Pretty reasonable.
Yeah, no, they're
Okay.
same with
We could add a few more, just. And so, do I see the health department has been, or you don't know?
I don't know.
You're just here to answer some questions if we ask.
So far you've answered every one, I don't know.
Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, Jennifer has some questions.
Right, in our, and I don't have my page pulled up here, in our ordinance,
Definition.
in our definitions of a tourist home, which is that portion of a building a portion of a building, number of people and so forth, is distinct from a bed and breakfast in that the term for accommodation for guests is generally longer than 1 week, 7 days. And on the application, it says daily. Isn't that-
Right, so it would be, they consider a one-night stay. 'cause-
But then that's not the definition of a tourist home. It says, because to be used as a daily, so 1 day,
Or 2 nights.
vacation rental. So that does not fit our,
Well, no, that's not the standard, that's just a sort of a statement, right?
well, it's, I guess it's in our
In
glossary.
other words, it says generally because that was
Generally.
their perception of how they were operated at the time, but I think the practice is different, actually.
Yeah, it's the same as.
Well,
Well, it says, the following definitions shall be used in the interpretation and administration of this chapter. The various definitions of various terms do not necessarily represent the same definitions as may be found for terms in some other points and chapters in this code.
Well, I have to agree with Jennifer because
What?
I know, it's shocking. Does that camera work? No, I agree with her 100% because, and I have said many times here and at the planning commission that this designation in our zoning ordinance of what is a tourist home is not one of these Airbnb type things. It's like that thing in Spurringville, where there's those little cabins, and right before you get to that new restaurant on the way
Rappahannock?
out. What?
And Rappahannock?
Yeah, right, where Rappahannock is, right before you get there on the right, there, it used to be called Cab Inn, I think, and they had those little, sort of little
Chalet
log
things.
cabins, right, or whatever they're called. That's a tourist home. Or a tourist.
That's more like a motel.
Well, but they're separate little cabins and everybody had their little room and people would go and maybe rent that out for a week or a month or for part of the summer, 2 weeks, and go come up here and go up in the park and be on vacation. That's a tourist home. If you read it, that's why when you read that definition, that's exactly what it fits. And don't forget that this was adopted in 1985 or 86.
This one says amended August of 97.
Okay, it may have been amended, but I don't think it was
So I mean, I
amended
don't know what
much.
was adopted.
It was, I'm not sure what they changed in 97, but it wasn't that general definition. I don't think, because I remember when we did this. There was no such a thing as what they're doing now, of these Airbnbs.
They didn't have the internet back then.
Well, they didn't have the internet, they have a lot of things, but anyways, so they're calling it a tourist home because there's nothing else in the ordinance to allow it to be done. And I mean, frankly, and I guess luckily for people like you, I'm not the zoning administrator anymore. I just say, sorry, look at section 170-29 or 27 or whatever it is that says, if it's not in here, you can't do it. And then you could all come to the Board of Supervisors and say, we want to have a provision for tourist homes. And then they could make up a definition for Airbnb type tourist homes, or they could change this definition, and that's the way to do it. And what you just said, Alex, is very interesting. I appreciate your point of view, but in the last case, you just said exactly the opposite. Well, I know that's what it says, but that's not really what it means. And, and last month we had the other end of it, where it's over 30 days, and I don't know that there's any magic to 30 days. That it's now one is a tourist home and one is a long-term residential rental. So I think the definitions, I think this is something Mr. Byrne needs to be asked to bring up at the planning commission. They really need to, there's something pending and it helps clarify it, but it really needs work. And because we have all these things coming up, and I think there are different considerations, like, for example, Mr. Byrd has said many times that, well, this kind of a use is not any more intensive than a single-family residence, because maybe it's even less intensive, because they're only there on weekends in some cases. But that may or may not be the case. I don't know. I helped write the ordinance, but this part, it says what it says, and generally it's supposed to be a longer stay than a B&B. A B&B, we know it, we had them then, and that's why there's that definition. And this was supposed to be a different thing. There's no meals, and the people stay there longer because it's kind of a cabin sort of a thing. So, like what's down, I'm not saying C-A-B-I-N, I'm saying C-A-B-I-N-N with a dash in the middle. Yeah, that's the place down in Sperryville that I'm thinking of. That's, there might have been one or two other places. There was a place down on the way to Warrenton that was kind of like that. That has been demolished since. They used to have music right here. On the right-hand side going toward Warrenton, that was a sort of a tourist home kind of thing.
The Blue Moon?
No, on the way to Warrenton.
Oh,
On the other
Warrenton.
side of the power line. You know where I'm going?
I don't.
Was that in Culpeper County? Or
Yeah, that must have been in
Yeah.
Culpeper County, but it's all been torn down now. So, I think the ordinance needs work. I think you have a good point, and that's my problem with all of these is that they were trying to shoehorn as kind of a square peg into a round hole, and it doesn't fit.
Because the definition is not up to date.
Well, if that's obviously this wasn't being done. This is I mean, just like you said, there was no internet, so it's like trying to read the ordinance about, you know, utilities and trying to fit something about utilities and make it, you know, apply to the internet, which didn't even exist when they passed the ordinance. So you're gonna have all kinds of problems when you try to do that. And the right thing to do is for the board of supervisors, you know, they haven't really reviewed this ordinance in some 30 or 35 years in a serious way. I mean, comprehensively. They've done this and they've done that, they've patched this up and patched that up as things came along. And, you know, that's to be expected. I'm not criticizing them for that, but it's time. There's a lot of things, and this is one of them that really need some serious work, and that's why we've got a delegate to the planning commission, and I think we ought to, I mean, maybe after we're done with this application, whichever way it goes, to ask him to ask the planning commission to really take a serious look at this, because this is a very separate and distinct kind of use from a tourist home, and that's a different kind of use than a B&B. And I think, frankly, I agree to some extent that the rules for a tourist home ought to be a little more strict than they are for an Airbnb thing, where somebody occasionally rents their place out for a weekend or a
So maybe
week.
there should be a category for.
There should be a separate category, exactly.
That's not what's in front of us right now.
Well, I know,
No,
so
but-
what is?
Well, I think what I'm just sensing is, if you're of this belief, and you're of this belief,
It must be that shocking right there.
no, that's fine, but that doesn't sound like we're gonna be able to make a decision. I mean,
Well, I think we need to put it in context. We have been allowing tourist homes relatively regularly for quite a few years.
But usually
And-
they're for longer
they're
stays.
never for long, never. They're
And
always just weekends.
there hasn't been any particular regulation of it at all, which I happen to think is poor.
You mean
And
regulation by who?
Do we have
by
a list of
the-
the tourist
the
homes?
county.
I'm gonna make a list.
to make sure that they are safe
But they
and
never-
habitable places.
Made that determination.
Are we supposed to
Not
do
we
that?
can't.
I don't think so. We deal with the zoning aspect of it.
Mhm.
If you look at this evening, we have 5 of these things to deal with, or 4,
Or maybe.
for this evening,
Or
that's
three
indicative
days, yeah.
of something. And I have a tourist home that I have been operating for 3.5 years. And so I'm pretty well versed at what my experience has been, and I can only imagine everybody else's experience is pretty
I
similar.
thought yours was a bed and breakfast because you were so close to it.
No, he's way.
No, I guess if I were to describe a tourist home, it would be a rental that does not have a resident supervisor or somebody overseeing the rental.
And it's rented to one group, it's not,
It's rented to one group,
or one family.
not
or-
multiple groups. At least this is the way ours is. And it can be one group made up of grandparents, parents, and children, or it can be a bunch of college friends who want to have a weekend together, or there are any old friends who want to get together in a different place. Any number of things, it seems to me, to provide a very reasonable and useful service where for what tends to be a very reasonable amount of money, people can have a family reunion, whatever kind of experience, cook their own food, live in the house, have sitting rooms, not just a bedroom. It is a kind of get-together type thing, and it seems to be very popular.
And in the town of Washington, people will come, go in, spend a night, possibly 2. And they're either bed and breakfast, or I'm sure that's the case for some of the clientele in this case, is, you know, it accommodates that type of a trip.
Yes.
So, and David, I agree with you that the definition,
That's two.
hold on, well, that I agree with you that the definition should be changed. My area of disagreement is that I don't think when it says generally such, it doesn't mean that that's a requirement, and I think that was possibly true in '85, or whenever that was drafted.
Okay,
but it's not
have you
true
read what
now.
it says? Read the definition. First of all, it's combined with boarding house. Tourist home or boarding house is the same definition.
Which are not the same at all.
Well,
Yeah,
in our ordinance they are.
I know.
Any building or portion thereof containing sleeping accommodations for not more than 12 persons, and that is proposed, by the way, to be changed to 10 to conform with the state building code, because if it is 12 people, then it's a hotel under the state
So
building
they're
code.
addressing this
Anyway,
now, yes.
well, they addressed it 2 years ago and they haven't acted on it. Maybe someday they will. Anyway, not more than 12 persons who are not members of the family operating the establishment. So that goes to your point, but that's just it. The ordinance doesn't say what you said is the norm. According to this, there's a family that's operating the establishment, and presumably who live there.
But a family.
Like, you know, this is some definition from like the 1930s or 40s when, you know, to make extra money, you know, Ma rented out rooms.
But that's a boarding house.
Well, or tourist home, it's the same
Okay.
thing, it's the same definition.
But this is
It's-
isn't there a different definition?
No, then there's one in bed and breakfast. Then it comes to the part that you said, where normally charges paid for such accommodations. Then it says, a tourist home and or boarding house, all lumped together, is distinct from a bed and breakfast in that the term of accommodation for guests is generally longer than 1 week, paren 7 days. In case
So that's
you didn't know
probably
how
true.
long a week was.
That's probably
All right.
true of a boarding house.
I know, but what all I'm saying, Alex, is you're trying to make a distinction, and you know, if we were debating what to put in here, like you said, I'd agree with you. But we're the Board of Zoning Appeals, we're stuck with the definition they gave us, and that's what it says.
But you could make that same case about the 25-acre density.
I just did, and I said that's what they gave us, and that's what I'm applying. And if you're the one who said, "Oh no, we've done it, so we're going to keep on."
They have a definition of what is allowed in the ordinance for the family apartment.
Provided it complies with all the other provisions of the ordinance. Well, so if it's-
We're
Okay.
wandering from our path.
Okay, no, I got it.
And I think that basically, as a zoning board, we have a couple of options. One option is to deal with reality as it is here, and as we have done previously. And the other is to make what I think of as an arbitrary and capricious change in our outlook of tourist homes and do something else. I do completely agree with Mr. Connick that the definition and ordinance concerning the bed and breakfast, tourist homes, whatever kind of short-term rentals ought to be revisited and made a lot more
clear.
up-to-date and clear. On the other hand,
That's interesting.
it does seem capricious and discriminatory to all of a sudden visit this kind of view on present tourist homes that we haven't done previously.
I would have this thought. There is no prohibition against starting a practice or returning to a more literal practice. There's no prohibition, like it's not, you don't have to give certain ones a pass. But I would say the one thing about this right now, we only have 4 members here. And if we had 5, we would be much more likely to get a definite vote one way or the other, because I have the sense that we may have a 2-2 vote regardless of what.
You know, wait a minute, can I just interject
Well,
something?
hold on.
I want to answer what Chris said, and
Okay.
then I mean, first, well,
Go ahead.
if we're gonna have a tie vote, that's not the debate. I mean, now you're saying we should change the ordinance or interpret it
No.
so we won't end up with a tie. So wait a minute. What I want to say to Chris is this, and as I perceive it, and I hear what you're saying, but not surprisingly, I would say what's been arbitrary and capricious on the part of the board is to disregard that definition and get to approving these things right from the get-go. And so, because we're now in this position, I see what you're saying, that there is an element of unfairness, because some people, this exactly what's in there hasn't really been applied, and maybe the reason it hasn't been applied is because the applicant, for better or for worse, put right in there, it's going to be for daily rental, and most of the others didn't say that, because either they read the ordinance or they just didn't say anything. But this one says in it, daily rental, and that obviously is way less than 7 days, and so we've got, I agree it's a technicality, but that's our job, to apply the ordinance as it's written, and there's zillions of cases, which I don't need to cite, where the boards of zoning appeals don't have the right to make up legislation. They have to apply the ordinance no matter how bad it is, and if they can't say this complies, their choices are: 1, to table it, and go send it back, send something to the planning commission, say, or do you want to change it and fix it so that table this application so that we could maybe approve it if you pass the changes that are pending, and that'll make it okay. But all of what I really want to say is the result.
That was quite a sentence.
Okay,
Yeah, but
the
that's
result of what
that's a good
you're
sentence.
saying is, the result of what you're saying is, we go on and on and on, and as we see, it never gets resolved. And you know, I brought some of
Look, I
these
agree.
issues
I
up
agree.
2 years ago, it's now March, and then 2 years ago, I sat and I wrote all these changes to straighten a lot of this out, took it to planning commission. They took 1.5 years to finally wade through it after hours, and you were there, you know what they did. Some of it you agreed with, some not, okay, some about the roads and the issues that went to court and so forth, to resolve them and clean it up, and they still haven't had a public hearing on it. Maybe they're gonna do it next month,
So
so,
they're having a joint meeting.
but not about that. Not about those things, only about your thing, which you just applied for a month ago. That's already gonna have a super swift,
See, I paid the $600, I guess.
right. So, right, maybe I should have paid $600 out of my BZA salary. And if I stay on the board for about 20 years, I could get it back.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, my problem with what you're suggesting is if we keep on making these accommodations, I guess, no pun intended, for people where the ordinance doesn't exactly fit, the result is it never gets fixed. And if we would finally say, look, this is what the ordinance says, we're very sorry, the answer is no, you're not going to get your permit, go talk to the Board of Supervisors. Maybe if they got enough people coming to them and saying, hey, this isn't fair, we need to change it, they would change
Okay,
it.
what if we all agree with you?
What?
What if we all agree with you right now?
I don't know, that would be pretty scary.
So why don't we just table this?
All right,
Is that,
are you okay with that?
I think she's a good test case. 'cause
What's the
she's-
difference between a vacation rental and a tourist home?
There's no such a thing in our ordinance as a
There's a
vacation
vacation.
rental. That's the problem, there should be a thing called an Airbnb rental, like exactly what you want to do.
And
That
how do
describes what you
those-
want to do,
How do you
versus
know?
a board
Except
member.
that
So
you
who
put it-
supervises these tourist
No.
homes that they are having people stay a whole week?
Well, I guess you could go,
Nobody.
That you don't know if they really are just doing.
That's right. We
Nobody
don't.
knows anything.
I mean, we're at least
Well-
being honest, saying that it's a daily, we're not lying and
And
saying
I
you're
mean,
that.
we have
Right,
cases.
but there
Yeah,
there is
we're
lodging
punished
tax,
for it.
there is lodging tax that needs to be
yeah, but it
paid.
doesn't say, well, this one stays
It doesn't
something
break it down
nice.
to
It's
an
just-
individual.
Well,
I guess
but
the-
if you
the
say
question-
this people stay here 2 days and they paid $300,
But I
you
don't
would
think-
know that, and our rate is $150, so it's $300, then you know it's 2 days versus if they have to put out $1,000, then you'd
But
say,
I mean,
well,
I don't think that they're giving all that detail, I think they're giving a monthly sum, is that right? How much
It
do you?
it is done monthly now, and it is a certain percentage of.
But you just
the
say, we
gross.
got so much in revenues this month.
That's right.
And then
Right,
you
we had
pay a
this
fee.
many nights that people stayed here, and then it's just a total, it's not.
But getting back to this daily, weekly, whatever, as far as I perceive it, I don't see that it makes any difference.
Well, I mean,
That
but,
we are worried about something that is inconsequential.
But that's not our job to do that. That's what I'm saying, the ordinance defines it, and if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit.
in some of the discussions that, when we've been, looked at not boarding homes, we haven't looked at boarding homes, but
What
bed and
is-
breakfast, people
what
were
is-
saying that there's so many people
Dash
coming and going and that kind of thing.
170-8, the definitions, and then medical owner. There's
Well,
another first. Mr.
one thing about this is, I think we could table this application,
Mhm.
and then.
Well, we've got
I
a
have-
bunch more applications this evening.
Tabling it means it's not, no decision is made tonight, and we'll kick it over till the next meeting.
And what's gonna happen at the next
Yeah,
meeting?
it's not.
You're gonna report back whether the planning commission's of a mind
Well,
to
and-
change it.
hold on,
And if
hold on.
our past is any
No, no, no.
purview,
We may have-
preview of the future,
We have 60 days.
sometime in the distant
I think we have
future,
longer
the
than that, as
supervisors
long
might
as
do
we
something about
open
it.
the
And
hearing.
then you
They
do not
haven't done
have to
anything
pay
about
except the
anything.
fee.
Yeah.
I mean,
Or
we've already
reasonable.
been waiting since December.
They kept you on the planning commission.
They
I
kept
would
me
say
on.
the alternative might be rejected.
If I would've been on there, they'd be doing something, I'll tell you that. Because I would be lighting a fire under every month about this stuff.
And then you can't reapply for 1 year.
Right, well, then she could just rent it out, so if you want to.
Okay, so you know, but I mean, I think, I think it's reasonable to table it, and if she wants to withdraw it, she can withdraw it.
Or you could amend it, I guess, and say it's not gonna
Or
be
amend it.
daily.
Yeah, I mean,
I
that's,
mean, I guess that's the issue.
okay, I mean,
Is that it says right in there daily, and so most of the time it doesn't say that. It just says we wanna have a tourist home, and
but,
everyone
Well, I
assumes
mean,
that
could
if
we
it's
give
the.
them the option to strike out daily?
Well,
I
well,
mean,
since
the-
they,
this-
and
this-
the applicant is not really here,
She can't do it.
so I don't think she can do it. I
I
think,
did the application.
yeah, but you can't really answer truthfully that question. I mean, I don't think we should just.
I mean, it just seems to me we are making a considerable problem out of something that isn't
Oh, I'm
a
sorry.
problem. It is a.
I apologize for being honest. I mean,
Yeah.
No,
I know,
we apologize
Yeah,
for that.
there'll be a lesson for you in Rappahannock, that's
And
never a
I
good
think
idea.
it needs
That's
to
not
be-
true.
It needs
Honesty
to be
every
kept
time.
in mind that so
No,
far,
it's-
there hasn't been
Very
one
disappointing.
problem or complaint about a tourist home or a bed and breakfast
So what are
in
we-
this county yet.
That you know of.
Correct,
I know,
The loft
that's right.
rental that's daily above the spa.
but that's in the town of Washington.
That's the difference.
That's a different deal, and see, they may have better wording in their thing. How about,
Maybe they'll annex the.
how about if we just, we can kick it back to the planning commission with this question, like David is suggesting, and table it for tonight.
That's my
I
motion.
mean, I think that's the best we're gonna do tonight.
Okay, now, do we need to table everybody else's application?
Well, I think
They're not doing
they said.
tourist homes.
Only because they lied and didn't say it was
No,
gonna
no,
be
they
there.
didn't lie. No, they didn't lie, they just didn't put it.
That was so unfair.
No, Chris.
You know, if I can say
Very
something,
unfair.
none of us who have applied for these applications have used the term tourist home, which has been obsolete since, as Mr. Connick said, the 1940s.
You're talking
Airbnbs didn't come about until 2008, which is years after the last time that was looked at.
At least 10.
At least 10. And you have passed a lot of Airbnbs for people in this county, and granted, I actually sent an email to Michelle encouraging her to look into the possibility of establishing an Airbnb regulation apart from all of this, because hotels, motels, B&Bs, tourist homes are all commercial ventures. Airbnbs are not. They are quasi-commercial. And so you need to get a new regulation, but since you have already passed all of these other Airbnbs, what are you going to do? Say no to her
Well, here's-
and then take
we're
back
tabling
all of the
No,
other?
no, listen, here's the thing though.
We're in an open public
But you-
meeting now.
Yeah,
right?
no, this is fine. Look, we cannot.
Who are you? Could you identify
He
yourself? I mean, I think
he
that's-
has an
Albee.
application, Mr. Alton.
Okay.
For a tourist home.
Well, let me say, Mr. Albee, when the state legislature, which is like 2 years ago, had, if you're familiar with it, they had a proposal that came up in the state legislature, one of their terrific things that they're the trend now, to take away from local boards of zoning appeals or just localities, everywhere, the power to regulate the Airbnbs.
If it was in the
If
principal.
they met certain qualifications, and there was a definition in there that, first of all, the owner or operator lived, and not only lived on the premises, but it was his principal residence and domicile. And then the only things that the locality, through the BZA or otherwise, could regulate was like hours, noise,
Parking.
I don't even know about part of the track, some very minor things, but basically it was going to be legalized on a statewide basis with no requirement for any zoning permission to do it. And that's when I drafted all these amendments to this that actually I thought it was going to pass.
Was that almost 2 years ago?
It was more than 2 years ago
But it
now, it was
didn't
March.
pass.
Well, I know, but I didn't know that at the time, so I incorporated all those definitions so that, figuring, as Mr. Byrd said, that by the time they got around to passing it, the legislature would have passed it, and so that was sort of in there. And then when it didn't pass, what they did was, they tabled it for a whole year,
They being
the state legislature. And then, in
It
last
died.
year's session, not this year's, but in 2017 session, then it came up and they didn't pay it,
They died.
it died, right, it never even got re-proposed. And instead of that, there was something that was the other way around, that counties and localities could have a special regulation and a register of
Could
B&Bs.
promulgate regulations
Right,
relevant
Right.
to that particular legal jurisdiction.
that's right.
So that the rules governing Richmond do not apply to Highland County or Bath or Rappahannock or Page
that's
or
right.
any of those. And that individual counties like ours can develop
That's
regulations that are pertinent to Rappahannock County.
That's right. I mean, mostly that's right. And you know what happened? The commissioner, and it also had to do with incorporating the whole business about how to register with the county so that they would automatically be amenable or whatever to the food, what's it called? The meals and lodging tax. And that was all. So the Commissioner of Revenue, or the Treasurer, I forget which one, came to the Board of Supervisors last March or April, right after that passed, and said, here it is, here's what they passed, what do you want to do? And you know what the answer has been since then?
Table.
Nothing.
Nothing. They didn't say yes, they didn't say no. They said, thank you very much for telling it. They didn't even say that. They just sat there as usual, and she left, and not another thing was ever heard about it. So that's why we're in the situation, and that's part of the reason why I as much as I appreciate what you're saying and what Mr. Byrd has said, if we continue here at this board to just pretend everything's okay and to try to, use this tourist home definition that really was written for something other than an Airbnb, it's never going to put it to the front
We have a
of the...
zoning administrator.
What?
We
do.
haven't had a zoning administrator full-time until Michelle got here.
We've had.
We've had, it's always been somebody acting as zoning administrator
No.
in addition to something else.
No, we've had one.
No,
They just
John
haven't
McCarthy was
stayed-
a zoning
Well,
administrator
but he was a
full-time.
county administrator.
And,
This was just sort of a sidebar.
well, actually, if you know the history of it, it was the other way around. The
Okay,
He's
county
so
now a
administrator was-
professional
Hold on,
who
hold
can
on.
focus on zoning issues.
Okay, thank you for your words. So you move that we table.
I move that we table this and with the request that Mr. Byrd take it to the planning commission, explain what the issue is, or you write, I think actually it would be better if you wrote a letter summarizing what our difficulty is and recommending that they take action, and I'll be glad to give you the stuff that I already wrote
And we
go
could
through it
submit that
and submit
at
that to
this
the
meeting on the
next,
second,
no.
Board of
Well,
Supervisors.
that's only a public hearing on those two things. It'll have to go to the next planning commission meeting, the regular one in April, and I'll be glad
But I
to
think
help.
it can still be for information brought forward. They
Well,
don't have to
okay,
do
you
it.
can do that, but anyway, and ask them to
Do
do something.
okay, I don't know if that was all the motion, would you second that motion?
I'm thinking.
Chris, would you second it?
I would second it with the proviso that we not table the application, but that we vote on it, because it seems to me arbitrary and capricious of us
So but if we
to
don't,
rewrite the zoning ordinance on an ad hoc basis with no warning or particularly any real reason.
but Chris, it does seem like it's not gonna pass tonight. Based on unless I'm not psychic.
You're not psychic.
Well, it could pass if one more person.
If one of two people who've stated a very strong opinion change their mind. Yeah, but it does,
There's been some very strong and valid arguments on both sides. Go by the letter of the law, and the letter of the law is archaic. And we know that we have passed multiple tourist homes, not tied to the 7 day.
Well, I don't think we've ever tied it to that.
Well, but
I
It's
know.
been, people have brought it up before.
Yeah, okay.
so, and to separate one or two people out and say, well, today's the day and you're not gonna get it because,
We screwed up
because
by
we've
not
made a
having
mistake.
a clean ordinance.
But that's not
Okay.
we, that's,
Well,
Well, another
I mean,
board.
why is it that, what has happened? What large asteroid is approaching that
It's
we
from
are
China.
worried about?
It's gonna come down.
And as far as I'm concerned, this whole business, there is a very strong case for not regulating it all, because it is a rental not unlike a regular rental of a house.
Well, I rest.
okay, but that's not what it says.
Okay, I feel comfortable making the interpretation that the definition was trying to talk about what the practice may have been 30 years ago, but it does not reflect the practice now. And I know that that's not the ideal situation, and it should be changed. But I think
I completely agree that it should be changed, and I think it ought to be regulated and inspected for the safety and accommodation of the people involved. But none of that is bodes to happen. And what I feel is that this whole looking back to a fossilized ordinance doesn't make any sense, because it's not responding to any problem.
Okay,
We're just all of a sudden saying, gee, the tablet written in stone isn't being followed. And
So, Chris,
it doesn't seem fair to the people who are applying.
I got you. Jennifer, are you willing to make a motion?
We've got one on,
Oh, but we don't have a
It's
second.
not been seconded.
has not been seconded.
Did you second it?
No.
I didn't second it,
No, no,
and he didn't second it.
no, there was no second to that.
I paused.
Okay.
Even though I would second that if I had to. But I'm not gonna second it right now. I just wanted to see if Jennifer.
Do you have a motion?
I move that we approve this application.
And do you wanna add?
I would also move to communicate with the planning commission and the supervisors to rewrite and clean up our
Definition.
definitions of Airbnbs, tourist homes, bed and breakfast, all of these things in such a fashion that a reasonable decision can be made.
According to the practice.
Forthwith.
Yes,
But
but
that's.
again, I mean,
They've had it, if they've had it for 2 years.
But they can't make that decision until they advertise it now, right?
yes.
Is that?
Well, I don't know, I'm not on the planning commission, you are, and I have one question for you. You know, last month, it was one or two supervisors, one I know was here, one supervisor was here. And so we had that big harangue over the other end of the scale, not 1 day, but 30 days. Is it what, 29 days? That's a magic number. And I said, why is that a magic number? They're renting it or they're advertising the daily rate. We all know what they're doing. And so we had the same discussion that, yeah, it really needs to be cleaned up and it's in the minutes that it needs to be clarified, and the supervisor heard it. They had a meeting a week or 10 days later after our meeting, and crickets as usual. And then the planning commission, I don't know, you were on, did anybody bring it up? Did anybody say what's going to happen with that other thing, or do we need to revisit it?
And they approved or gave approval to all of these applications.
Well, they recommended it, that's all they did.
Okay, so, but
So-
we're taking a more definite action here, and I will draft a letter with your help, if you
Okay.
don't mind.
No, I'm glad to
It
do it,
will-
'cause I mean, I agree with the seven.
Well, Chris made this motion, so would you be willing to second it?
I'll second it,
Okay, is there any further discussion?
without repeating what's already been said.
All in favor? No, we got it, all in favor?
Vote.
Aye.
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 Nay,
Okay, 3-1. But thank you for bringing up
but
those
I'm
points.
getting closer to winning. See, it
You
used to be
are.
4-1, and now
Dave,
it's
you
3-1.
A lot
You
of
had
your
everybody.
concerns are our concerns.
Okay, so I think you're.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You understand, you're my competition.
Yeah, you should have, yeah, that's it. You should
I
have
have a vested interest in it.
You shouldn't be saying that, you should have recused yourself.
I think you've got to, there were some pictures of your all's place. You need to do some serious brush cutting around there.
She was waiting to get approved to start.
Okay.
You're welcome, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now for the next one. Is that how you say your name?
Yeah.
Are you looking at the paper? Okay, thank you. Isn't this my paper?
I think I've met you before.
Probably not.
So you're
In Richmond.
David Albee. Is that how you,
I got it, yes.
David Albee, okay.
Virginia Nurses Association. We've done a lot with Virginia Nurses
Maybe
Association.
because of any ERP things, you may have done.
Okay. So we're talking about a tourist home.
Oh my God, a tourist home.
Oh, please.
I've got the definition right in front of me.
Very uncontroversial. Okay, so tell us just a little bit, you have a piece of property on Pickerel Ridge Lane, and
Yep,
it's 140 acres.
yep. And I have two houses.
Okay,
And the 1958 house I use as a guest house for all my friends, family, stuff like this. And then periodically, I rent it out for Airbnb,
Right now.
not tourist home, Airbnb.
See, did you like the way he made that distinction?
I don't know, if he's doing that, it's
Okay.
not allowed.
Yeah, that's, okay, so there's one marked cabin and one marked dwelling. Which one is this one?
Cabin.
Cabin.
It's right in the right era then.
Yes, it is.
And it's not close to any neighbors?
2 miles from the nearest neighbor.
2 miles?
Surrounded by park, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah,
So
surrounded
where is,
by park.
where is it?
It's up at the very end of Old Hollow.
Oh,
You
okay.
have to drive through the park to get there.
Yeah, my
Oh, is
road's
that right?
about
Really?
2 miles and about.
Is Pickerel,
a
it's
mile
at the
on
end
the
and there's that
east
stone
side.
wall there? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you're doing this for daily use or?
Daily?
Don't say something like that. I just sat here and listened to a harangue.
There's a picture of it on the screen.
Okay.
It's pretty, it's very,
Okay.
very
Oh,
pretty.
that's a pretty one.
Yeah.
It's an upscale 1958.
Yes, it is.
I mean, it really is, to have all the glass and so forth. I thought it was very nice.
What you don't see is the
Is the
view
view.
out, all
The other
down.
side.
I was there before you were there,
Uh-huh.
years,
Okay.
and it made it,
Now, I do have a question.
no.
Sure.
Okay, so you have been renting it out, and I think in cases like this, haven't we, I don't know if we've required, have you made contact with the
I've been paying
commissioner?
taxes.
Oh, you have been?
Oh, I've been paying taxes. In fact, I talked to Debbie Nick about the possibility of the treasurer's office just automatically debiting, the way we debit for our property taxes, debiting the things, because Commissioner of Revenue keeps a record of everybody who's renting on Airbnb and VVRO,
Yeah.
so you know the stuff, so it seems easier for them to do that.
Oh, so
than for
you
me.
are reporting
Oh, of course.
each night
Yeah.
that something?
It's not that I haven't wanted this to go through, it's that this process has been beyond nightmarish. Beyond nightmarish.
We're just talking
So-
about, we missed a couple meetings because of a lack of a
Well, we
quorum.
wouldn't even.
Okay, that's fine.
We didn't miss
Now,
anything.
we're planning.
Well,
Okay. Well, we're here
Yeah,
tonight.
no, I know,
Okay, okay.
and I'm glad you're talking about
And we have-
getting a new
we have
regulation.
spirited discussions.
Yeah,
Talking about it.
and is, okay, tell them, I told you,
Yes.
I suggested to Michelle that it would be advantageous to all of us, including Chris, who are involved with Airbnb type things, to be a part of the discussion of promulgating the regulation, so that, you know, you're coming at it with fresh eyes and all of that, and I think
And
that's,
the experience.
and we've had the experience, yeah,
So
and we know what the problems are.
So how often do you rent it out versus letting your friends come out?
Spastically.
Sporadically?
Well, I mean, no, really
Once a month?
spastic.
Okay.
It may be when the season is good, I may rent it once a month,
For a
you know.
week?
I may rent it, and I only rent it when I'm there. So it's not,
I mean,
Unsupervised.
it's never unsupervised.
Yeah. Well, we've had some B&Bs that people didn't live in the house, but there was an adjacent structure, and we had still called it B, like the oyster guy.
yeah.
So
Okay.
it's almost like a B&B because we're so
We'll have to
close.
change that.
Well, he called it a B&B, he was renting
Yeah,
bedrooms in his house.
right,
Well,
right.
he
But
had-
even though that he didn't live in that structure, he lived, you know,
Yeah.
12
Doesn't
feet away.
B&B say that they live in the house? Yeah.
Well, B&B should serve meals.
Yeah. If-
Yeah, I mean, he did.
And,
Yeah,
yeah,
at least be.
yeah, they
that's a
did.
distinction between Airbnb and B&B.
Because Airbnb is sort of like.
They serve
just-
air, right?
We serve air, you got it.
You just go into somebody's house, they're gone. You stay there for a night or two.
Or 3 or 4.
Or 7.
There's 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Is it any further questions on this?
No.
I have
And
a
I've got,
question. You have 141 acres, I think?
yeah,
How can it be a 2-mile road to 141 acres?
2 miles distant from his neighbors. Is what he
it's
was
2
saying.
miles up through the park.
It's not a straight line.
It's not a straight line.
He's up
Even
through
so,
the park.
that's must really make a lot of loops.
It does.
And there's nobody else that uses that road, just
No.
your property?
It's just my property.
Okay, so we don't have that issue. Okay, great. I guess.
I'm going to open the public hearing. Would you like that?
Yeah, you never had a public hearing on the other one, you never opened it.
Well, it did kind of, because he forced the issue.
I said-
forced the issue.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I said to Alex,
Yeah, I
I
was
said,
kind of
make it
thinking
the
about
public
that.
hearing now.
But see, he kind of obliterated the thing, so,
All right.
which is good, thank you. Thank you for doing that. Is there anybody in the public who would like to speak on this application? No? There being no one, I am closing the public hearing. Is there any further comments or a motion?
I move that we approve this application.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Abstain.
Okay, so we're getting,
Okay.
okay.
Great. Thank you.
So where is the AARP? Isn't it in Alexandria? Or is it in
No.
DC?
6th and.
Oh, that's your button.
16.
Wow.
I used to work at 16. On Maryland Avenue. 16.
Oh, okay, not bad, not too far.
Okay.
Thank you, I'll be in touch.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Okay, the next one,
Another being.
the most controversial one of the evening.
Always.
Yeah. Is Foster and Ellis family apartment.
That's it.
You may come forward and introduce yourselves for the record.
I'm Michelle Summers. Nice to meet
You
you.
didn't swear this last guy
I'm
in.
Greg Foster,
But I'm-
and this is Bonnie Ellis.
I just want to figure this is.
Well,
Okay, that was your swearing. How are you?
Very well.
So you-
Great.
Okay, so you were looking to put a exactly 1,200 square foot building?
Exactly.
Exactly 1,200, we're gonna get as much out of that 1,200 feet as we
Okay.
can.
For nights or?
Hmm?
No, no. Okay, and you've given us a diagram.
Mhm.
This is
A nice diagram,
very nice.
a nice
Thank you.
sketch.
Oops,
And,
you want me to pull it up?
Yeah, go ahead.
and this is 9.1720 acres.
Correct.
And this is on, is 628, is that Resettlement Road?
Mhm.
That is, yeah. Deering? Oh, it is
Yeah,
Deering.
well,
We're in Deering. right?
yeah, I guess it is.
So it does turn into, or whatever.
But it's,
Okay,
it's,
okay,
it's,
that's
it's,
fine.
it's
Okay, I know.
down, it's near
They're the same thing.
Wakefield.
Oh, it is the same thing, okay.
Okay. But you turned it.
Yeah, it's called Deering Road. Everybody always called it Resettlement Road. Beforehand.
And was this created by a family division years ago, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're really contiguous with your dad's.
Okay. And you're aware of the restriction of renting it to a family member and no one else for 2 years?
Well, this is the story. It got kind of confused. We were building this for ourselves, and we're gonna remodel the other house that's there for our family members. We're trying to think ahead. Are you just
So you would call it
cringy?
bait
Well,
and
how
switch?
big is the family member's house?
We have this happen before?
Bait and switch? Yeah.
No, just,
I don't think so.
I think we have done the main dwelling turned into a family dwelling, but the thing is that it has to be 1,200 square feet or less.
Well, that's not 1,200 feet. Is it?
See, that's the only.
What's that?
What's the size of your house?
It's over 1,200 square feet.
Yeah, so, I mean, and we've had a situation, and I don't know if that's totally, the way it should be, but we've had a situation where an existing small house turned into an efficiency apartment to a main house, which was
Right.
built. I don't know.
Why don't you just apply for 2 dwellings on a lot?
Well, you seem to think that was a bad idea.
Well, the idea was that we were gonna age in place. That's the thought. And that we'd have the other house, that would be for our family. My folks are getting older. They're in a retirement facility. We may have to sell their property. Could be that they're able to keep it. We'll just have to see. But if it's not available, then my brothers, their nieces.
For children.
Yeah.
But are you part of this family as well, right?
Am I part of this family?
Well, you're both part of it.
I've been in this family
Well,
for
no, my
28
point being,
years.
I guess if you're gonna live, I don't know, I've never thought of it this way, but if you're gonna live in this house, that is, in some sense, family.
Mhm.
So I don't know.
And also, we want to stay in this county. And there's all this talk about aging in place. And we've seen it with Greg's parents, aging in place when you're not prepared is really hard.
It's really tough.
It's really tough. And their house doesn't support it. Their lot doesn't support it. Their driveway doesn't support it. And we're preparing. We want to age in Rappahannock County.
How far out in the future would you be living in this house?
How far in the future?
One
new
you're
house.
building.
We're gonna try, if we can, to build it within the next 2 years.
But you're gonna stay in your current house and then eventually,
Right.
Yes, eventually move into
Right.
that one.
yeah, because don't you have a kitchen? An industrial kitchen?
Well, I have an approval for that, yes, but I must admit, I kind of haven't been pursuing that.
Oh, okay.
Mhm. But I do keep it current, because
Okay.
I put so much effort into it, I don't want to lose it. And some people do contact me when they do, and I fill their orders, but I'm
Right.
not actively doing
Okay.
what I was doing
Do
before.
you have enough information?
Me?
Yeah, I hear you, I see your wheels turning.
My wheels are turning the same direction they were turning before.
Are you talking about the fact of it being
That's-
less than 25 years? Chris, do you have any thoughts?
All that I can say, having been through aging in place with both of my now deceased parents, it is a major undertaking, and most houses are not designed and built with that in mind.
And we need more of those in Rappahannock.
We do indeed.
And what is the exception that can be made for an existing dwelling?
What do you mean?
There's an exception to these rules for an existing dwelling,
Well,
if it's to become a family apartment.
I don't, honestly, I don't think that's, it just
You don't
says
think
family,
To my
family
mind, they
apartment,
have
it just says that
They
they
have a
member of the
family
family.
apartment and want to
So
live
you-
in it.
okay,
That's
so-
theirs,
I don't think
it's not
there's
ours.
anything
So you're-
special.
I'm not, that's not
With
my
that,
problem.
with that, you're okay with that part?
I'm not
You're
having a
okay
problem with that.
Okay, okay.
But it seems
That's
like we
fine.
had one a couple of years ago where, I forget what happened, but it was over toward Woodville, and it seemed like they were, that whatever they were living in, and then they were living in something, and what they were gonna, that's what it was, what they were gonna build was way bigger than 1,200 feet.
So
What they were already living in was
No, I
within the
thought, no,
1,200
they were
feet.
gonna build something way over here.
It was way bigger than that, so it wasn't this
Yeah,
case,
they were
it was like
building
the
a
opposite.
family apartment.
Anyway, I don't have a problem with that it's as long as
Okay.
it's the same family is gonna be,
Okay,
it doesn't matter.
so that makes,
Well, my trouble is the
25 acres.
There's the 20, because that's what
Well,
it
maybe
says.
eventually, isn't your father's land contiguous with you? that you could,
Well, maybe that should be
Pull in-
something else that
that
they should
later on pull in the
define
20
better.
15
Well, that's
acres.
defined, I mean,
That's
No,
part
no,
of it.
well,
But, you know,
But
you
you
can't
you
present that
can't-
now.
But see-
You know, and that's speculation, but
Yeah.
you
that would
could
be
get
the
into
ideal.
looking at the balance of the land because family divisions allow down to 2 acres.
Yep,
They do, but I mean, they've already made a family division, and so now, I mean, that's another issue, and I mean, don't let any of this splash on you because you didn't write it, but I mean, theoretically, these are all exceptions. Family apartment, the family division, are all exceptions to the sort of general comprehensive plan and zoning, plan of the county is to keep the large lots in the agriculture areas and get all the small lots kind of around the towns and villages where they're closer to doctors and stores and
there
all
are
that
no
jazz.
doctors,
And there are no small lots around the.
and there's no.
Well, there could be, but
grocery
there could be. Anyways, that's the general scheme of things, and what this
We're
is all, well, I may be dreaming, but so are the people who wrote this, I guess, and the dream was to keep the agricultural lots in such.
Okay,
So
so-
you've already taken advantage of one exception.
But in
If we're
some
getting-
ways, it is still doing that because it's clustering those two houses within
Yep.
200 feet.
Well, it's not for me to say, all I've got is what I've got, and when I look at it, here's what it says. It says use limitations, 170-19, the section I couldn't find before. No permitted special permit or special exception use hereafter established, altered, modified, or enlarged pursuant to this chapter shall be operated so as to conflict with the use limitations for the zoning district in which the use is located. And then you go to 170-37, use regulations, and the first thing, maximum density dwelling units acres in an agriculture district is 1/25. So that's the basis of, I mean, I don't have a problem with what you're doing, but it's not
But
me, it's what the ordinance
What
says.
you didn't say this to them, but somebody could apply for a special exception to have a second dwelling on a parcel. It
They
doesn't
could.
say it has to be 25 acres.
They could, but it would be subject to that same use limitation, exactly the same, and if there was, in other words, if you had a lot that was less than 25 acres, in my opinion, you'd have to deny it.
And I would just state that my view is that this is an accessory to the main house.
But it says, right, it's a special use permit, and it says use limitations. Al, read what it says, 170, no permit permitted, that's permitted by right.
170 what?
19A.
Should there be some prohibition for large families?
Well,
Because the density is so much greater with large families and places on the neighborhood
But
is so onerous.
Chris, I'm not arguing with your zoning theory if that's what they wanted to do, but we as a board have a very limited thing. They come to us, they apply for whatever the SP use is, and we have to apply this ordinance, and whether I like them, or I like their use, or I agree with their philosophy of aging in place or not, that's not we don't have that is the definition of arbitrary and capricious when we make up stuff that's not in here.
Well, no, we're not making anything up. This isn't, family division is an exception to that rule.
Well, that's not what's before
Family
us.
apartment is an exception to that.
Not to this rule. It says no special use will be allowed if it conflicts with the use limitations, and it
But
doesn't.
say you're not creating a new parcel.
It doesn't matter if you're creating a new use, namely another dwelling unit. And that's specifically what 170-37 says. No, that's the use, and it says use limitation. I mean, how could you confuse it? This is use limitations. No, no special use permit may be hereafter established or enlarged, blah, 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 so as to conflict with the use limitations for the zoning district in which it's located. And then you go and look at 137. It's entitled use regulations. So what else could it mean? And the first one says 1/25.
One parcel per
The
25 acres. It does not.
No, one dwelling unit per 25 acres. And it says minimum lot size, it says dwelling unit / acres, 1, footnote 1. For maximum density, see 170-22 and 170-38. anyways, it's violating the density unit.
I don't think it says anywhere that
Well, you
parcels
couldn't have-
smaller than 25 acres
But you couldn't even do
may
it,
not have family apartments.
but you
or-
couldn't even,
It does in that way, that's
David.
effectively what it does.
David, you couldn't even do it on a 25-acre parcel.
I agree, you could only do it on a 50-acre parcel or larger.
Right.
And that was the intent, because the next thing is, sooner or later, somebody's gonna come in and say, let's cut it, let's put the line right between this house and that house. And for zoning purposes, as far as the water usage, the water table, the sewage and all that, noise, lights, whatever you wanna say, it doesn't matter if it's two family, or if it's two different families, or it's a whole bunch of people in the same family. They got two houses, they got two drain fields, they got two wells, and they're pumping water, and whether they're related by blood or marriage, for zoning purposes, it's kind of irrelevant. Just like you always say, oh, whether they're living there or whether it's a tourist home, it's kind of irrelevant. You focus on the use. Well, I'm saying, okay, focus on this use. Whether it's the Fosters or, the Fosters and somebody from Timbuktu who moved into the county, they're all living there. They're turning on the faucets, they're flushing the toilets, they're driving their cars up and down the road and so forth. It doesn't matter.
Well, one
It's the
thing,
use.
David, one thing that I would agree with is the 2-year restriction probably could be lifted to where it was just permanently had to be a family member or affiliated with the house. I think that would be
Okay,
reasonable,
but
that's
again,
not-
already escaped into the county for 25 years like that.
Yeah.
But
another thing to what you're
170-40, it's
saying.
got the family subdivisions, and it's talking about.
170 what?
170-40, family subdivisions. And it
This
says,
isn't a subdivision.
I know it's not a
It
subdivision,
was a
but
subdivision.
you're keeping talking about, it's already been divided, it's already gone through some of this process.
Okay.
And so, no more than one family.
But by definition, David, this creates another dwelling on a parcel.
Right, another dwelling unit.
And you could then say, well, you need a special exception, but no, you don't, because you can do it with a special permit. There is a provision for it. But anyway, I think on this particular application, we're not gonna solve this tonight. But I think we can make a decision.
You're right, exactly right, Jennifer, again, for the second time tonight. 170-40 says, a family transfer is
That's
exempted from the
transfer.
density limitations. So, because, and it says the transfer is for the purpose of a present or future residency of the family member. So when you create that's what I'm saying, they already did that one time, and they already took advantage of that. They got out of the density restriction by creating this lot in the first place, and now we're being asked to allow them to note it out again, give them another variance from the
Well, it's
density
not really a
limitation.
variance.
Cannot
It's
exceed
allowed.
by 5. So.
What? Say that what?
Look at number 3. They can't exceed it by 5 transfer.
That's the number.
That's the number of lots,
Smaller than 50 acres,
25.
50.
So all those 5 lots would be exempted, but I don't know, how much land do they have next to it?
It's 250.
Well, see, that they could make another family, if they haven't made 5 cuts, they could make
No, they
another.
can't.
What?
There
Can't,
are two divisions there,
you know.
because my father has already sold off a number of
Yeah, so they've
properties.
clustered ownership, so he can't do this division on the other parcel. But anyway, do we have a motion? I think we.
Yes, I move that we approve the family apartment.
As submitted.
Yes.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Is there any other discussion?
Hasn't already been said.
Okay,
At least 4.
all in favor?
Aye.
I vote, regretfully, I vote no, because of 170-19
So we have
and
3
38.
ayes, and looks like you've got it till we figure this out. Okay. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for.
Sorry about all the histrionics, and
But we're
I hope
working
you
through some-
were amused.
No, I mean,
Doesn't matter.
he's bringing up some good points. and
This will
it-
be a lesson to you to
it
look at the
does.
agenda and make sure you apply in a different month when you can be first.
I don't even think that matters though.
It's very.
No,
Then you don't have to sit through all the.
We're equal.
I'll be in touch.
We're
Addressing
equal
issues.
opportunity, but you wouldn't have to sit through all the other ones if you were.
I wish you would come and back and go to either the planning commission or the board of supervisors and tell them what happened and say, you ought to do something about this, because I tell them and it just falls on deaf ears and they don't hear it. And I mean, I think that what you're trying to do is okay, but I still think the ordinance allows it.
He's
and-
what do you call it when you take things at the
A
exact
little
words?
literalist.
Well, I'm a lawyer, I
What
guess.
is the word in? like,
Strict
the Bible?
construction.
There you go, strict
Strict
construction.
construction,
An originalist.
yeah,
Not a
and, so
It
that's
it
just-
reminds me a lot about religion, you know, God came here 2,000 years ago and hasn't really graced us since.
But he left it in my hands.
Yes.
leave that out of the minutes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are you
We're
gonna
good.
stick, are you gonna stick build it?
Yeah, we're gonna,
Am I saying that?
Yes,
we're
we're
gonna,
gonna,
yes.
Greg's gonna do it himself.
Now, you're
Where
not,
working now?
I wonder,
Various places, catching up on a lot of small stuff.
is he representing the Hawkins?
No.
Hawkins
I'm
is
just
here.
being funny.
Oh,
What?
I'm just making a,
Nice to meet you.
Take care.
I'm assuming
Take
if the
care.
Hawkins
See
are
you
not
later.
here, see you later.
Good night.
Good night. Okay, the Hawkins is apparently are not here, do you know anything about that? And I don't think we have the applicant here, do you want to give them?
she
a-
was here at the, 2 months ago at the planning commission. meeting.
Maybe she just forgot.
I have no idea.
2 months ago?
There wasn't a planning commission meeting last.
Well, see, they're doing it,
right.
remember they're
Get the
doing
list
it
from the
like
bed and breakfasts.
2
Yeah.
months ago.
Well, then they missed it.
And then they missed
All
one.
right.
And go back and see who they are and see when, if they.
Okay, now hold on,
stipulate-
should we, I mean, we can either, I guess, I've forgotten what it is, if we
We-
don't open it,
Just continue.
It's just
we could
continue.
continue it, is that, or table it, open it, and then
No,
table it?
if you open the public hearing, there's nobody here, so let's just.
Well, I can open the public hearing, we've got
Wait a
some.
minute, let's do the right thing.
Look, my understanding is on the advertising, if we open it and then table it, then.
Recess it.
Or recess it, then we don't have to re-advertise it, but there is a deadline of 60 days, correct?
Right.
So,
All right, wait a minute.
advertised
Just
for
wait a
this
minute,
one.
let's look it up, because I always get this mixed up.
But I'm saying that we should probably just open it, see if anybody wants to say anything, and then recess it,
Yeah,
and that way
I
we.
think that's right, but let's just
Can
make sure that's
We
the
don't
right.
have to get hung up.
Either
in
continue or
that.
recess.
Here we go, the term continued means the hearing is rescheduled to a later date without having been commenced. The term recessed refers to a hearing which has been commenced and is then scheduled to a later time and place for completion.
So we.
The hearing
should
is
commence
commenced when it is open for public comment by the chairman. If a hearing is continued to a date in excess of 60 days, notice shall be given for such continued hearing in accordance with provisions of subsection B, which means re-advertise. If a hearing is concluded but action is deferred until a future date, no further notice shall be required prior to action being taken.
So I could open it and conclude.
Yeah, if a hearing is commenced but cannot be completed for any reason, the hearing may be recessed to be resumed at another time and place without the necessity for any further notice
Yeah,
provided.
that's what I-
So you have to open it and then recess it.
Okay, so I'm opening the Hawkins tourist home application. Is there anybody who wants to say anything?
Lou?
Is there anybody in the public? Just a nod or a wave?
Oh, Jim Bill's back there.
Oh, okay, he likes this. Okay,
No, he's against this.
I'm gonna close the public hearing.
Recess.
I'm
Recess.
Go to
closing
recess.
the public hearing.
No,
No,
recess.
just recess.
Oh, okay, I'd like to motion to recess this
I move to
until
recess the public hearing until next month.
next month
To
meeting.
our regular meeting, which is on April.
Do we need to vote on that?
Again?
Yes, we need a second.
Second it. I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
So,
and so, Michelle, you don't mind notifying them just
No,
to
don't
make
mind.
sure? I don't know if they don't show up a second time, what we do,
So if people show up
So we
next
will
time
have
to
BZA.
talk about it, they can discuss it.
Well, they would have been here if,
But it was recent, so
yeah, I mean, they would have been here and if somebody wanted to say
I
something.
think they will be.
Okay, it's pretty mild. Okay,
Very good. Now, we
Now-
what, the minutes this thing?
well, hold on. The next one, and this is still hanging around, I swear I thought we had approved payment, but there's only been,
myself on this, but I thought you had paid it.
there's only been one, because I verified this with the law firm today, only one payment ever made on this, on September 14th, of $5,000. And anyway, so the balance due is $3,675.71. And I think, my understanding is the supervisors want us to make a request to them. Is that your understanding?
We've got a lot of requests today.
No, well, but I mean, specific.
You're the one,
I hope you were taking notes.
you're the man.
I think we needed to have like a resolution or a formal request to them that they pay this bill.
Well, I think that they want you to approve it, is my recollection.
Okay, so we would approve it
Approve it and request
and
that they pay.
request, so.
I'm gonna recuse myself. I do
Have you've seen this bill?
I have.
Okay. And
And
then,
so
I've seen
do we need a motion
yes,
that this
we
final payment is
approve,
approved and we request that the supervisors
Pay.
pay it?
or direct the treasurer to pay it. Okay, yes. Is there a second?
One second.
I'll second. You want me to second it?
No,
I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
regretfully,
Abstain.
Okay, so you're on aye. Okay,
yes.
so you got all that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, next is the budget. Did you have any strong feelings on the budget?
Later in the day, after I sent that note around to everybody, I got a note, I don't know if you all saw it, I guess he sent
Oh,
it to
from
everybody.
Gary.
From Gary Curry, and he said, well, he's trying to winnow it down or whatever, and he can, the way I read it, I don't know, it sounded like he can borrow money from other accounts, and we have a huge, we cut it down last year, and I still see nobody spent a nickel of it. We've got a huge $750 or something travel budget.
So for going to learn.
That's a
Conferences,
big, go to conferences,
Okay,
but let's hope we don't have
But
any
in other words,
litigation.
if it's gonna be short, it's gonna be short, the advertising would be short a couple of $100. And I have to say, thoroughly confused, but I didn't really go look at the other parts, but last year, I remember asking about it, and because we didn't spend any of our advertising budget the previous year. And I remember Debbie Kaiser saying, well, that's because it all gets paid out of some account that's buried in the Board of Supervisors advertising for zoning stuff. So I don't really know, frankly, it sounds to me like it's sort of a double count anyway. And even if not, I think we could pay it out of the money that's allocated in there, which he can do without a problem.
This is
for travel.
300 per application, is that what they budget for us? Is that?
But he only had 6, he had 6 times 300, and I don't know, when I did the one for last week's Dodd thing, it came out to $175 for the advertising,
For the ad,
for the
okay.
2 weeks. But that was only one little block, one little, so the one, do you know what the one was for like this month? Because, this was high, that had 5 things in it, but still.
It was $470
For the 2 insertions?
for the advertisement for this.
Right.
For 4. But the other side of the
But
equation is
400
they collect like,
Okay.
is it 400 for a special use permit or 5 or 6?
4.
4, okay, so each applicant is paying $400, which more than covers it. Well,
The advertising.
it covers it.
Well, because
for-
that had 6.
Yeah,
But
but
it's
that,
supposed to also cover
Plan
mailings and
yeah,
postings and so forth.
well,
And
it's
then-
pretty close.
And then who pays for the board, for the space on board docs?
I don't think we're
The way-
charged.
is it-
They don't charge us for that.
Is that a free space or?
I mean, it's free.
They don't charge the BZA for that, that's just there.
I don't know the cost.
In other words, there's no incremental cost, I don't think, for that. So I think it's fine. I mean, I guess what they budgeted is fine.
Okay,
I mean, frankly, I think it'll be 2,000 just to be safe.
okay.
And,
Is
so,
that,
I don't know who we tell you. I guess you tell Gary. I don't know what Gary
Then
didn't
we
send us.
accept the budget
We
and
approved
circulate
it.
and
Okay, do we
reviewed
need to
it,
vote on that?
approved it.
unless we should put in there 3,000 and some dollars of legal fees.
Well,
3,600.
That's not for next year, that's for this year.
What-
That comes out of this year. No, they don't. Yeah.
No, look, it only had 5,000 approved for last year.
Yeah, but they didn't spend it all.
They spent the 5, because they paid these people 5.
Let them figure.
Okay. Okay, well, I guess we have a motion.
I move that we
Approve the budget.
approve the budget.
Is there a second?
I accept it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, very good.
Now what?
Okay, now annual report, and I have not completed it. I have started assembling the information, but I haven't finished. So I will make
Try to
it
do that before the year.
before the next meeting.
Because you know, they're waiting over there. Maybe that's why the supervisors haven't. No, they're waiting.
Okay.
You know, I heard some
Well,
muttering the last time.
I'll
Where's
do
the
it.
BZA saying we're putting a judge wants to see it too.
Okay, well, we'll try to cover that.
Hurry up before there's more special use permits.
Okay, or tourism. Well,
Thursday.
the other one is, okay, so there's the, Fraser.
That Fraser thing, yeah.
Okay,
What's the
so,
status? So what I understood about it was they got some kind of permits, but they really haven't done very much work. And what last I heard, which was a couple months ago, they hadn't had any inspections either. And then I heard that the trailer got demolished in the windstorm.
Oh dear.
So,
They have active permits.
right.
Right, but the active permits only last 2 years, don't they?
I thought they did get a septic put in. No, they did.
I'm unaware of any
Pretty safe in
damage
the
to
windstorm.
this.
What?
I'm unaware of any damage from the storm to this.
Oh, I thought you told me that.
There were actually, it was another trailer that was damaged, it was not this one.
Oh, okay.
Okay, my understanding is that they have gotten a drain field, and I think they may qualify that they've substantially started construction or whatever, because they've placed a mobile home. And they've done, they've done the grading and they've done, I mean, I think it sounds like they've done
Who's the building inspector?
probably enough.
They're torn out.
Does
What
this,
was he saying?
so has he been out to see it, or does he get
Um,
updates or something like that? Maybe we should have him go take a.
Is there a building permit?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so that he would be involved with that, I would think.
Last I heard, which was like I say, a couple months, but I also heard that they're sort of living in it and it's all connected up with like extension cords and it's not really,
But
it's not wired in, like the permanent stuff has not been done, but they may be occupying it in
We can go take a
violation.
look.
Huh? They
We
may
can
be
take a look.
occupying it without an occupancy permit.
then that's not good.
No, so, and if they're in violation, then maybe we ought to, I think we ought to take some kind of action to at least spur them on to either comply or we ought to revoke the permit.
Okay, so how about, I know her a little bit. I'd be happy to call her
Okay.
and just see, get an update. and-
Or why don't we get the building official to do it?
Oh, okay.
Does he
To
have
tell us or
official-
to tell you what's going on, and the
Yeah,
other
okay.
question is, are they living in it? I
But
mean,
then the thing is, objective eyeballs seeing what it is.
Yeah, well, I can call her since we are taking this, somebody's gonna have to go there and check it out anyway.
Okay.
I'll call her and just see, and if you wanna do the building.
Okay, great.
That's fine, just, okay.
Okay.
Is that enough? Okay.
Oh, so then Anderson,
Oh, and then Bill Anderson has told me and submitted an email that he is resigning.
but he's not given an official letter, or,
Well, it's by email.
You need to forward that to me,
Okay.
To you, why do you?
well, both of us.
Yeah, because I'm
Okay.
supposed to tell the judge.
Okay, so here was my suggestion on this was, I know that in some cases, there are advertisements placed, and I know it has been advertised in the past.
Well, then it should be
position.
again.
And I'm thinking it would be nice to just as, as
The
soon
judge
as
does
possible.
that.
Well, I don't know, he
It
didn't,
comes,
Did he
it
do it
comes
the
to
last time?
Peggy Ralph, doesn't it?
Yeah, Peggy, when I send him the letter, he's gonna send it to Peggy, and they put an ad in.
Okay.
And she puts an ad in, and then the
Okay.
judge looks at the resumes, is my understanding, and then he calls
Okay.
the ones he wants to talk to for an
okay,
interview.
so you'll,
So I'll do that
Do
as
that.
soon as you get me the,
okay,
the thing,
okay,
the letter.
Okay.
I'll do that. I'll send you a copy.
Okay. And then
And
I'll
then,
take it from there.
because if they advertise, you never know who might be interested. And does it have to be someone from,
No, it
that
doesn't, actually does not. It used to be
because
that
that
way,
was the
but
custom.
it used to be that way in the planning commission too, but it's been eliminated, so that way.
Has it, I'm sure?
So that we, yeah.
But they
it's
still-
citation to read it.
But
They
do-
usually do it that way.
Yeah, they,
And the judge told me that he would like to do it that way if it's, so he takes that into consideration as a factor. if
For a
it was-
balance.
so would the ad state that
It's not gonna state that.
preference
I
to?
don't know, that's up to the judge
Oh, okay,
and Peggy, I guess. I mean,
Okay.
I think she has a standard ad that says there's
Yeah.
a
Okay.
vacancy.
okay, well, we'll do that, and then hopefully by the next meeting, maybe we'll have a member. Maybe.
Well, I mean, he usually
If all
advertises.
of the stars align.
Okay. Now, the minutes,
I took out eloquently,
yeah,
You did?
I did.
well, okay, so
There's another typo.
one thing that I was hoping
Top
to go,
of second page, third line, fourth line down,
I
on
didn't
the far
really,
right hand thing, it says Mr. Connick repeated his
Oh, right.
prior disclosure.
one thing I was hoping to do is, I just got this morning, and I've had a pretty full day. If we could just do the final approval next meeting.
Okay.
If that works, because I did want to go over it. It's very detailed, and I didn't really get a chance if that suits everybody.
That's fine, I think
Okay.
it
There
would
was
be
a-
foolish to
Just a comment, there was zoning was misspelled one place.
I
Did you
fixed that.
already- You
I
fixed
fixed
that one? The other thing is there in that same paragraph
That
where-
same paragraph,
where his was, or was it? That it says, Connor repeated his prior, said he had obtained advisory opinion from Mr. Goff as well as other conflicts with it. But you don't have the evidence. So you didn't present the evidence, but then do you
But you
present the?
put your,
no, because those are, believe it or not, those are exempt from, I mean, I don't have to disclose that, and they're exempt from FOIA requests too. They're confidential.
you mean the opinion or the, okay.
It's in the statute.
He
If
did.
you ask for an advisory opinion, the only time it comes up is, or the only time it can come out is if you're actually prosecuted for a violation and you want to put it in evidence in your defense.
But you can submit it. If you can publicize it if you chose, right?
I'm not sure.
Oh, you could, right?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay, okay.
But I know it's exempt from FOIA.
But you don't have to.
I think that's
Yeah,
correct.
okay.
There's one or two places where you mentioned Debbie Kaiser, that she was the zoning administrator, but she wasn't the zoning administrator in January
I-
2016. So I thought she was the zoning administrator, or at least the deputy.
She
zoning-
converted over to
Right.
being the full-time.
Yeah.
But at that point in time,
In 16,
January, but it was later, it was about March
No.
or April. It was before John left, which was in June, that she became zoning administrator, but anyway,
but she was deputy administrator.
Deputy, right.
So then, just look at the dates and then what
Well, I'm
position.
gonna have to go look it up in the minutes.
Well, then
Because
you
she was converted from
Right.
assistant or deputy.
They switched at some point, or he gave that up and he became the deputy zoning
But did he
administrator.
leave in May
So,
of June of
Yeah.
He
16?
physically quit in
Okay.
May, but I mean, he was, because he used up all his vacation. So the
Oh.
formal turnover, when she formally became
yeah,
county administrator,
Just-
I think was June 1.
But then if you, then she was
But
deputy
she was,
before.
but she became zoning administrator before that,
Well,
a couple months, but
Just-
not in January when that email
but she
came
may have been deputy or something like that, so
Well, I'll
just,
see if I can, in
because
the meantime, if we're
it's
gonna
mentioned
continue it,
about-
I'll look into that.
Yeah, we'll
with the board
continue until next
in a
month.
minute.
And I'll try to get you if I have
All right, what
any
else?
substantive.
well,
I think that
I guess it's on 4, where, second line, a neighboring landowner, Cecile Gardner,
Right,
you have a period after Cecile.
Is that her name?
Yeah.
That's her name.
Just to strike that.
wait, I can't find it.
And then I had a
Wait a minute,
question,
I can't find it. Oh, way down here.
well,
James Watson, Canada. Oh, I
What's
see
at the
the
top
last.
of the page?
Cecile, okay.
then
All right.
Are we
All right.
supposed to assign this?
she,
Yeah.
she made that statement, and so we have no way of validating what she said, but is there some way we can just say she stated that?
Well, I said she expressed her concern.
Chris,
Because, I mean,
can
the
you
other
sign
thing was, can we look back to validate that it was or was not true in these 2 or 3 days, now that we've gone through this whole thing about now, that a day is fine.
Thank you.
You know, was there?
Well, I mean, I
logic
just
past
said,
this?
that's why I worded it the way I did. She expressed her concern that they were abusing it, but I don't think it's up to us to verify it or
Yes.
not.
Yeah,
So maybe Anderson will have to come by.
okay, I'll get it.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that it's up to us to verify it or not verify every time somebody comes up here and makes
Yeah,
a
okay.
claim. That would be time consuming. That's what she said.
Yeah.
All right, and then you took out elevator inspections.
Now,
It was,
do you want the copy?
your feelings aren't hurt tonight.
Do you want the
I
copy?
don't
No,
know,
I don't. Do you want the copy of what she wrote on, or you've already?
I already put it on my copy.
Okay. I think we're done, right?
No, if you keep saying that paper this way.
Here. Oh, you signed? Oh, no, I signed. Is that it for the meeting? Is there a motion?
I don't know, where's the agenda?
Well,
No,
no,
yes.
the meeting's not over yet.
Well,
We have a
what do we
list,
have left?
we have a list to give to Mr. Byrd, or just to assure that Alex gets with David,
And then we'll.
that we have a list that we get things to the planning commission, because this really is aggravating
I agree.
it's very aggravating that something's been going on for 2 years, and it just gets like, well, we don't have time to do it, or whatever. That they need to come up with task
Plus, I went
force.
to every single meeting, and sometimes they got to it at the end, and other times
Then
they were too
tell
tired.
them-
and they
I
didn't
mean,
do
we
it.
need to let them know that it is it's
Yeah, no,
critical,
we
it's a
will.
critical priority, and
Can I interject? We are working on the amendments. I'm working with Mr. Goff on the amendments that you had presented,
Right,
and we're trying to get those put through.
okay, good.
So
I
staff.
mean, I've talked to Art, you know, and for example, now what's going on is, now Art's getting into it, because somebody finally, you know, said, yeah, you got, and so Art said, what about that definition of spawn? I said, I don't know, I stole it from some other zoning ordinance from the default here, so I went around to a couple other counties and saw what they had. And so now Art is like interjecting after everybody, the planning commission went over it all for all that time, and he never opined, and now Art's coming forth with his views of what it ought to say, which, you know, I guess, so anyways, hopefully that process will wind its way.
So
I mean,
the
I'll-
planning commission wants to get through it.
well, they
Good.
should. Okay?
Okay.
But now we have, you know, 3 or 4 different new planning commissioner members who didn't participate in all that.
Who were the 3 or 4?
Well, Fraser's gone, replaced by now Chris Parrish.
Oh, and then Bennett.
And the Biniac is on there. So when it comes up, you know, and
They'll
Jason
have-
Brown is gone, so Holly Mead's on
Oh,
there,
right.
since they did all that. So, well, I don't know what their views on any of that are, and they didn't participate in any of the discussions, I have to say, to his credit, when Mr. Lisinski
All right, so then I,
talked about it, he said, well, I wasn't on here when he discussed it, but whatever that's what they decided to do, and that's what I'm gonna go along with, but I
Well,
guess
they may be.
some new member may not.
Okay.
all right, the processes that we came up for the variances and special use permit and the forms and so forth, you've been piloting them, so is it working? Do you think you've got it,
Mhm.
does it need to be any other additions to it or any tweaking?
People are pretty happy with it.
Okay, because it seemed like everything that came before us this evening
Well,
was
it's pretty,
complete,
complete.
except for the word daily. But they put that in there.
Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Ready?
Good meeting.